Hello everyone, welcome back to Hit the Apex. I'm Charlie and today we have another video. This time we will be reviewing round 10 of the 2023 season where we were at the Red Bull Ring for the 2023 Austrian Grand Prix. This weekend was in fact a sprint weekend, so the schedule for the weekend was practice 1, qualifying, the sprint shootout, the sprint and then the race. Before we get going, make sure to like, share and subscribe to the channel if you're new around here. Dugout Daily the Football channel, Hit the Apex the F1 channel and at MCFC Hibs on Twitter. We'll get going then and we will start in practice 1 where Verstappen led Sainz and Leclerc as sprint weekend begins in Austria. Red Bull driver Max Verstappen set the pace during first practice for the Austrian Grand Prix, placing ahead of Ferrari pair Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc across a busy hour of running around the Red Bull Ring. Following its first appearance of the season in Azerbaijan, F1's sprint format is back in play at the Spielberg venue and promises another action-packed weekend of racing with more points and prizes on offer than usual. Under the revised 2023 schedule, drivers and teams have one practice session to get their cars in order for qualifying, which takes place later on Friday, with Saturday set aside for the sprint shootout and sprint itself, followed by the Grand Prix itself on Sunday. As the FP1 action got underway in warm and dry conditions, but with rain very much a threat for the remainder of the weekend, the top three finishers from the Canadian Grand Prix, Verstappen, Fernando Alonso and Lewis Hamilton, continued where they left off and promptly got down to business. Just over 10 minutes in, it was Verstappen who topped the times with a 1 minute 6.598 second lap on hard tyres, half a tenth clear of Alonso who was on mediums, and a further tenth ahead of Hamilton who was on hards, with a hard shot Sergio Perez who missed Thursday's media duties due to through illness, also in the leading group. After several phases of improvements on the mediums and hards, which included a 1 minute 6.416 second lap from Hamilton that saw the 7-time world champion briefly take over at the sharp end, a late flurry of runs on softs set the timesheets into a frenzy. However, while most of the field swapped to softs in the closing stages, including the Mercedes machines and the upgraded Ferraris, who were sporting a new front wing and floor edges, the Red Bulls opted against using the red mount rubber and used mediums instead. Despite the tyre performance offset, it could not stop Verstappen, who has won 6 of the 8 races held so far this season, leading the way with his 1 minute 5.742 second lap, some 2.5 times quicker than Sainz and Leclerc. Hamilton was the lead Mercedes in 4th, followed by the other Red Bull of Perez, while Haas driver Kevin Magnussen, set for his 150th Grand Prix start this weekend, grabbed P7 to split the Aston Martins of Lance Stroll and Alonso. George Russell was around 4 tenths slower than teammate Hamilton en route to 9th, with Alfa Romeo's Zhou Guanyu completing the top 10 from Williams racer Alex Albon, looking to add to his fine points finish in Montreal, and McLaren rookie Oscar Piastri. Nico Hülkenberg and Valtteri Bottas were 13th and 14th respectively in the second of the Haas and Alfa Romeo cars, the latter surviving a trip through the gravel exit in turn 4, ahead of the AlphaTauri pair of Yuki Tsunoda and Nick de Vries. Bringing up the rear were Williams' Logan Sargent and the Alpines of Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly, who had a low-key start to the weekend, with Lando Norris 20th and last in his heavily updated McLaren after ending the session without a time on softs. F1 drivers and teams will now have a short break to regroup in the paddock and analyse the data from first practice before the all-important qualifying, which sets the grid for Sunday's race, gets underway at 5 p.m. local time. We will move to qualifying then, where Verstappen pips Leclerc to pole position in dramatic Austrian Grand Prix qualifying session. Max Verstappen made it 3 pole positions in a row for the Austrian Grand Prix with a charging qualifying performance at the Red Bull Ring, getting the better of Ferrari pair Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz in an action-packed session. Verstappen overcame deleted lap times in Q1 and Q2 with plenty of drivers, including Red Bull teammate Sergio Perez, falling foul of track limits to make it into the top 10 shootout and deliver his pole-grabbing effort with a 1-minute 4.391 second lap. Perez was absent from the Q3 battle after dropping out in the second phase with successive deleted times, leaving the updated Ferraris to take the fight to Verstappen, Leclerc missing out by just 0.048 seconds after an aggressive final lap. Sainz took third, another tenth and a half adrift, with Lando Norris delivering a stellar performance in his updated McLaren to secure a spot on the second row, denying the Mercedes of Lewis Hamilton and the Aston Martins of Lance Stroll and Fernando Alonso. Nico Hülkenberg in the Haas continued his run of Q3 appearances with another strong drive to 8th, slotting in front of Alpine driver Pierre Gasly and the Williams of Alex Albon, who starred again despite losing a lap over track limits. Particularly large number of deleted lap times, the running theme of qualifying led to some dramatic exits in Q2, with George Russell unable to recover from a track limits violation en route to 11th in his Mercedes, just ahead of Esteban Ocon's Alpine. Oscar Piastri had to settle for 13th in the second of the McLaren machines, without the luxury of teammate Norris's upgraded package, while Valtteri Bottas was the fastest of the Alfa Romeos in 14th, despite a wild spin in Q1. But the headline from Q2 was Perez's elimination after he lost all of his lap times for running over the white lines, leaving him back in 15th and facing yet another race day recovery after similar situations in Monaco, Spain and Canada. Yuki Tsunoda was in the mix for a Q2 spot but lost the lap time for track limits after the clock had stopped and endured an early qualifying bath in 16th, along with the Alfa Romeo of Zhou Guanyu and Williams rookie Logan Sargent. Kevin Magnussen had little to celebrate at the end of qualifying as he took a lowly 19th after what will be the Haas driver's 150th Grand Prix star, with the under pressure Nick de Vries 20th and last in his AlphaTauri. So as it happened then in Q1, Verstappen continued where he left off. With the sprint format in play for the second time this season, drivers and teams had just 1 hour of practice to get up to speed for qualifying, which also promised a traffic-related challenge given the short and flowing nature of the Red Bull Ring. When the green light switched on at the end of the pit lane and the session began with the anticipated weekend rainfall holding off for now, it was Verstappen who set a provisional benchmark with a 1-minute 5.19 seconds. Hülkenberg, Norris and Sainz all getting laps deleted over track limits during their opening runs. Just before the bulk of Verstappen's rivals could offer a response, Bottas went for a spin at turn 1, ending up facing the wrong way in the grass, an incident that initially brought out yellow flags before race control opted for a red flag. However, there would be a twist during the stoppage, with Verstappen losing his initial pace-setting lap time for running too wide at turn 10, meaning he tumbled down the order while promoting Piastri into P1 from Perez, Magnussen, Stroll and Leclerc, others to be stripped of laps for Hamilton and Zhou. Verstappen made up for his deleted time by pumping in a 1-minute 5.116 second lap when the session resumed, slotting ahead of Sainz, Leclerc, Norris and Alonso, while Stroll, Ocon, Sargent and De Vries, having also lost a lap time, and Hülkenberg, the drivers in danger heading into the final 5 minutes. Another flurry of track activity followed for the final Q1 runs, with Verstappen not improving but remaining at the top of the charts, while teammate Perez jumped to second. Just over a tenth adrift, Gasly put his Alpine between Ferrari, Perez, Sainz and Leclerc. Norris had climbed as high as second in his updated McLaren but dropped down to 6th when he lost another time for exceeding track limits, followed by the lead Aston Martin and Mercedes machines of Alonso and Hamilton. Fresh from his impressive point-scoring finish in Canada, Albon safely progressed to Q2 in 9th, with Piastri completing the top 10 for McLaren from Russell's Mercedes, Stroll's Aston Martin and Ocon's Alpine. Hülkenberg and Bottas recovered from their respective lost lap times and spin to just make the cut in P14 and 15, with Tsunoda falling into the drop zone after losing his best time for track limits after the checkered flag had dropped. Joe Sargent and Magnussen also fell at the first hurdle in what was an ultra-close first phase around the 4.318km track, with De Vries bringing up the rear as he deals with the pressure of intense speculation over his F1 future. So knocked out in Q1 was Tsunoda, Zhou, Sargent, Magnussen and De Vries. In Q2 then, there was drama for Perez amid a spate of deleted times. After a short break, the action resumed and Verstappen continued his charge by dipping under the 1 minute 5 second barrier for the first time this weekend, but his 1 minute 4.955 second lap was swiftly deleted for another track limits violation and promoted Perez to top spot, only for the Mexican to lose his lap as well. That meant Norris led the way with a time of 1 minute 5.038 seconds from Hülkenberg, Alonso, Sainz and Hamilton, with Verstappen down in the drop zone and having to wind himself up for a second attempt, leading to a sweary radio message from the reigning double world champion. Verstappen regained his composure to deliver a 1 minute 4.951 second lap. 1 minute 4.951 second clean lap, I should say, putting him 0.085 seconds clear of Sainz and another 0.002 seconds up on Norris from Leclerc, Hamilton, Gasly, Hülkenberg, Alonso, Albon and Ocon. Russell and Perez falling into the drop zone with more deleted times. That piled the pressure on for the final sequence of runs, which saw Perez jump to second 0.039 seconds away from Verstappen, but once again lose the time over track limits, meaning he dramatically failed to reach Q3 for the fourth successive race weekend. Verstappen remained in P1 from Sainz, Norris, Leclerc and Stroll, with Alonso, Hamilton, Gasly despite a deleted time, Hülkenberg and an inspired Albon also despite a deleted time reaching the pole position shootout. Russell narrowly missed out after his deleted time, taking 11th as Ocon and Piastri wound up 12th and 13th in their respective Alpine and McLarens. Bottas and the aforementioned Perez were the final drivers to miss the cut. So knocked out in Q2 was Russell, Ocon, Piastri, Bottas and Perez. And in Q3, Verstappen fended off the Ferraris for pole. When the pole position shootout kicked off, Verstappen once again hit the ground running to post a 1 minute 4.503 second lap and sit comfortably clear of the Ferraris of Ferrari drivers Leclerc and Sainz, with Norris and Alonso, the latter two running used soft tyres, rounded out the top five. Just as it looked like all 10 remaining drivers had completed clean first laps, Stroll lost his time over track limits, leaving Gasly sixth from Albon and Hülkenberg, with Hamilton the only driver yet to post a lap as the session reached its halfway mark. Hamilton's first effort put him fifth, just over half a second away from Verstappen, before news came in that Albon had also lost his first time due to track limits, putting him back to 10th and meaning he would need to repeat his hard work. As the final runs unfolded, Verstappen lowered the benchmark to a 1 minute 4.391 second lap, which proved just enough to put pole out of reach of the Ferraris, Leclerc getting within half a tenth as he dragged his SF23 around the track, and Sainz winding up third after a deleted time. Norris maintained his strong pace from Q1 and Q2 to take a superb fourth for McLaren, with their upgrade seemingly working well despite just one practice session to bed them in, as Mercedes-man Hamilton completed the top five. Aston Martin followed in 6th and 7th respectively, Stroll this time spearheading the team's charge from two-time world champion Alonso, with Hülkenberg, Gasly and Albon, the latter unable to make up any spots on his last lap, completing the Q3 runners. But after qualifying, Verstappen said it was very difficult because of all the track limits. With these speeds, it's so hard to judge the track limits. I think we still did a good enough lap. Very happy being on pole. We know that this is a different weekend with a whole format, but very happy with today. At least the car is quick, and that's the most important. With the grid for Sunday's Grand Prix settled, Austria will host the second F1 sprint of the season on Saturday, with a sprint shootout set to begin at 12 p.m. local time, followed by the 100-kilometre sprint race at 4:30. We will move to the sprint shootout then. where Verstappen charges to P1 over Perez and Norris during sprint shootout in Austria. Max Verstappen secured pole position for the sprint shootout at the Austrian Grand Prix with a stunning display at the end of a damp, dry session, heading Red Bull teammate Sergio Perez and McLaren's Lando Norris. Verstappen delivered 2 lap times quick enough for P1 in the SQ3 phase, which did not include Lewis Hamilton after a shock SQ1 exit, the Dutchman initially clocking a 1 minute 4.613 second lap before getting down to a 1 minute 4.44 second lap, with Perez recovering from his Friday woes, ending up almost half a second adrift. Norris and Haas driver Nico Hulkenberg, despite being one of only 2 drivers to run mediums, not softs, for his final lap, were also stars of qualifying as they landed spots on the second row of the grid for the sprint race that followed later today, getting the better of Ferrari pair Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc. Aston Martin also ran line Aston in 7th and 8th. Fernando Alonso just ahead of Lance Stroll, who also opted for mediums, with Alpine's Esteban Ocon and the other Haas of Kevin Magnussen rounding out the top 10. Alex Albon narrowly missed out on another top 10 grid spot as he dropped out of SQ2 in 11th, followed by the other Alpine of Pierre Gasly and the AlphaTauris of Yuki Tsunoda, who lamented traffic during his final run, and Nick de Vries. Mercedes driver George Russell avoided the same SQ1 fate as teammate Hamilton, but he reported a hydraulic problem on his way back to the pits and was unable to make it back out on track as he finished 15th and last in the second phase. Zhou Guanyu went for a spin in the early stages of qualifying and could not avoid falling at the first hurdle in 16th, with McLaren rookie Oscar Piastri not running the updates on teammate Norris's car, taking 17th after hitting traffic in the final sector. Hamilton would start the sprint back in 18th after his aforementioned dramas, leaving him with a massive task to take any points away from Saturday's action, while the other Alfa Romeo of Valtteri Bottas and Williams of Logan Sargent completing the order. So as it happened then, in SQ1 there was drama as Hamilton falls at the first qualifying hurdle after a dry first day of running in Spielberg, which yielded a thrilling qualifying battle between Verstappen and Leclerc. The heavens opened overnight and soaked the circuit for the standalone day of sprint action, the need for 2023 shootout setting the grid for the 100-kilometre dash. Despite a break in the weather, the track was still damp for the start of the session, meaning that rather than mandated medium tyres for SQ1 and SQ2 and soft tyres for SQ3, drivers were free to pick the rubber they wanted as qualifying developed and the conditions changed, while Williams pair Albon and Sargent and McLaren's Piastri opted for some exploratory laps on intermediates. The rest of the field felt there was enough of a dry line to head straight onto slicks, albeit Sainz coming back to the pits with a brake-by-wire failure. Verstappen was one of only 2 drivers, along with Magnussen, to go for mediums rather than softs, but his initial benchmark was deleted for exceeding track limits, with the same happening to Zhou after he recovered from a spin at the penultimate corner. With 5 minutes left on the clock, it was Norris who led the way with a 1 minute 7.755 second lap ahead of Alonso, Tsunoda, Piastri and Russell, while at the other end of the timesheets, Gasly, Bottas, Zhou, Sargent and the sideline Perez were all in the drop zone. Times continued to come thick and fast as the clock ticked down, with Perez lowering the P1 marker to a 1 minute 7.085 second lap on softs, and teammate Verstappen slotting a 10th behind on mediums, while Piastri reported traffic in the form of Leclerc at the apex of turn 9, an incident that will be investigated after the session. A dramatic final couple of minutes would see it all change again, a period in which both Ferraris were under pressure to make it out of SQ1. Sainz delivered a brilliant sole lap to jump to the top of the times with a 1 minute 6.187 lap, hitting the ground running in his repaired Ferrari, while Leclerc squeezed through in 15th. However, the first phase would still claim a big name as 7-time world champion Hamilton lamented the timing of his final run en route to a shock exit in 18th, and while teammate Russell progressed on the other side of the Mercedes garage, he reported troubles of his own and an apparent hydraulic issue. Verstappen ended up as Sainz's nearest challenger in second, followed by the high-flying Hulkenberg, Aston Martin, Perez, Stroll and Alonso, Magnussen, Russell and De Vries, with Norris and Ocon seeing out the top 10. Perez fell all the way back to 14th as the final times came in, but still made it through behind Gasly, Albon and Tsunoda, with Leclerc the final driver to progress by the finest of margins, denying spinners Zhou and Piastri, and a particularly frustrated Hamilton, along with Bottas and Sargent, also missed the cut. So knocked out in SQ1 was Zhou, Piastri, Hamilton, Bottas and Sargent. In SQ2, there was another early qualifying bath for Mercedes. Verstappen and Sainz picked up where they left off during their first SQ2 laps, with the Red Bull this time leading the Ferrari as Alonso and Stroll sandwiched Norris. Ocon held 6th from the Haas pair, and Perez and Leclerc rounded out the top 10. One driver without a time at this point was Russell, with Mercedes looking into his apparent hydraulic problem and subsequently confirming that he would be taking no further part, mechanics getting straight to work by replacing his steering rack. Heading into the final couple of minutes, the timesheets were sent into a frenzy once again, with Verstappen ultimately grabbing top spot on a 1 minute 5.371 second lap, putting him just over half a tenth clear of Sainz, as Ocon placed his Alpine ahead of Leclerc's Ferrari. Norris took 5th from Magnussen, Alonso and Perez as Stroll and Hulkenberg, under investigation over an unsafe pit release, claimed the final spots in SQ3, narrowly denying Albon, who had a lap time deleted and could not repeat his top 10 showing from Friday. Gasly, the AlphaTauris of Tsunoda and De Vries and Russell brought up the rear in SQ2, with replays after the checkered flag showing a pack of cars fighting for track position during the decisive runs, prompting an angry radio message from the eliminated Tsunoda. So knocked out in SQ2 was Albon, Gasly, Tsunoda, De Vries and Russell. And in SQ3, Verstappen storms the pole as Perez makes it a Red Bull 1-2. It was more of the same from Verstappen when SQ3 began, as he pumped in a 1 minute 4.613 second lap to top the early times from Norris, Perez, Sainz and Alonso, the reigning double world champion benefiting from an extra set of sauce that he saved on Friday. For the second runs, Verstappen found another level to shave almost 2 tenths off his benchmark and moved down to a 1 minute 4.44 second lap, with teammate Perez getting closest to him but finishing the best part with half a second slower. Norris and Hulkenberg, the latter running the hard and medium tyres, both excelled to bag P3 and P4 respectively, meaning they will share the second row directly behind the Red Bulls for the sprint race on Saturday afternoon. The Ferraris of Sainz and Leclerc were 5th and 6th after overcoming their SQ1 scares, followed by the Aston Martins of Alonso and Stroll, the other man on mediums, while Ocon and Magnussen ended SQ3 as the slowest runners. It now remains to be seen if there will be further action over the Leclerc-Piastri impeding incident and Hulkenberg's unsafe release, with any potential penalties applying to the sprint rather than Sunday's Grand Prix. Verstappen said after the sprint shootout, "I think it was good. Of course, the track was drying up, so lap after lap you were improving and you had to be on the track at the right time. Today we didn't have a lot of laps in every segment of qualifying, but I think we did well. The car was in a good window, good balance, so very happy, of course, to be first." The drivers will now take a break between the sprint shootout and the next session, which is the sprint, before lining up on the grid for the 100-kilometre dash at 4:30 p.m. local time. We will move to the sprint then, where Verstappen battles back against Perez for victory during frenetic wet-dry sprint in Austria. Max Verstappen emerged victorious in an action-packed sprint race at the Austrian Grand Prix, surviving some drama during the early stages of a wet-to-dry outing to claim an ultimately dominant win on Red Bull's home soil. Verstappen lost the lead to teammate Sergio Perez at the start, but quickly fought back and settled into a rhythm up front, cruising away from the competition to cross the line comfortably clear of the Mexican and Ferrari rival Carlos Sainz. Verstappen, Perez, Sainz and a handful of other front runners stayed on intermediate tyres for the full encounter, holding enough of a margin over a host of drivers who moved to slicks late on but could not make up more than the ground they'd lost. With a revised sprint format in place in 2023, the new shootout qualifying session set the grid for the 24-lap dash, which offered up the incentive of some extra points from 8th to 1st from 8 points to 1 point between P1 and P8 for the 20 drivers in action. The change to the starting order saw Charles Leclerc demoted from 6th to 9th, promoting Aston Martin pair Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll and Alpine's Esteban Ocon after the Ferrari driver was found guilty of impeding McLaren rookie Oscar Piastri in SQ1. As the race start approached, drops of rain began to fall and then intensified, taking the circuit away from slicks and towards intermediates, which were the tyre of choice for all, bar a brave Valtteri Bottas, who was on mediums by the time the grid was cleared of guests, mechanics and gazebos that had been pulled into action. Bottas's gamble swiftly backfired, with Alfa Romeo calling him into the pits for intermediates ahead of the start, where Perez dramatically got the jump on teammate Verstappen and forced his way past on the inside line into turn one, the duo continuing their exchange at the exit and Verstappen dipping two wheels on the grass. Verstappen instantly retaliated and attacked Perez under braking for turn 3, taking both of them wide and almost allowing Nico Hülkenberg through for the lead. With Verstappen back in P1, Perez lamented over the radio, "What's wrong with Max, man?" Matters got worse for Perez down at turn 4, where a pumped-up Hülkenberg applied the pressure again and slipped past on the exit, meaning the Haas found himself splitting the two Red Bulls, with Sainz holding forth from Stroll and Alonso. Lando Norris was a big loser in the turn 3 bottleneck, getting caught up behind squabbling Red Bull and suffering a slow exit, meaning he fell from 4th all the way down to 10th, slotting behind Alex Albon, Ocon and Leclerc. While Norris had lost the most positions in 7th, fellow Briton Lewis Hamilton had made up the most, gaining 5 from his 18th place grid slot to run 13th, just behind teammate George Russell and Kevin Magnussen, the Mercedes pair working their way past after scrapping with the Haas for several laps. Up front, Verstappen had stretched his advantage over Hülkenberg to some 5 seconds, a third of the way into the race, with the Dutchman's engineer reporting that the front left tyre was the limitation in the damp but drying conditions. "Do you think the track will dry?" Alonso was asked shortly afterwards. "Potentially, yes," came the response, with all eyes on the skies and whether there would be more rainfall to top up the patches of water or if it would hold off and the surface continued to dry up. At the halfway mark, Hülkenberg fell into the clutches of Perez and Sainz, losing P2 to the Red Bull driver at turn 4 on lap 12 and P3 to the Ferrari man at turn 3 1 lap later, with leader Verstappen now more than 10 seconds clear. Further back, Ocon, Leclerc and Norris went wheel to wheel over the final points-paying positions, the Alpine and Ferrari almost coming to blows between turns 4 and 5, while Norris watched on and waited to pounce on any drama. With 8 laps to go, Russell reported that conditions were not far off slicks, and moments after making that call, he headed for the pits to bolt on a set of soft tyres, while race control also cleared the DRS overtaking aid for use to add to the excitement. Having also fallen behind Stroll, Hülkenberg was another to pit for soft tyres, along with Piastri, Hamilton, Magnussen, Logan Sargent, Nick De Vries and Zhou Guanyu, but they all faced a race against the time to make up the 20 or so seconds they'd lost in the pit lane. With Russell lighting up the timing screens, Albon, Leclerc and Yuki Tsunoda were the next group of drivers to change to slicks, while the Red Bulls, Sainz, the Aston Martins, Ocon, Norris, Pierre Gasly and Bottas, running towards the back after his earlier woes, held firm on the intermediate tyres. Despite their strong pace, the slick tyre rain could not make the inroads they would have hoped for on the intermediate runners, with the top five positions from Hamilton through Alonso retaining their spots to the checkered flag. Verstappen crossed the line more than 20 seconds clear of Perez with an imperious performance, while Sainz rounded out the podium finishes from a battling Stroll and Alonso, and Hulkenberg worked his way back up to sixth, the best of those to swap to slicks. Ocon fended off Russell by 0.009 seconds as they took the final points on offer, with Norris and Hamilton just missing out in 9th and 10th, followed by Piastri, Leclerc, Albon and Magnussen, with Gasly losing considerable ground late on after being gobbled up by those on soft and medium rubber. AlphaTauri, Perez, Tsunoda and De Vries wound up 16th and 17th, with McLaren rookie Sargent and the Alfa Romeos of Zhou and Bottas bringing up the rear at the end of a dramatic encounter. Verstappen said after the sprint, the start was not ideal, a bit of wheel spin, but after that, after lap one, once we got back in the lead, it was good. We were just managing the tyres, knowing that if it wasn't going to rain anymore, then 24 laps on an intermediate is quite a lot, but they were hanging in there. I think, of course, the last 5 laps, the slicks were quite a bit faster, but I think for us so far in the lead, it didn't make sense to pit. We just hung in there with the inters, which worked well. Hamilton made up the most places across the 24 laps of racing, climbing 8 spots from 18th to 10th, while Norris lost the most ground, falling from his P3 grid slot down to 9th and outside the points. After Saturday's standalone sprint action, the F1 field will now get ready for the main event on Sunday afternoon, where the 71-lap encounter will take place. We will move to the race then, where Verstappen beat Leclerc for victory in Austria to make it 5 wins in a row. Max Verstappen completed a clean sweep of pole positions and race wins at the Austrian Grand Prix, with another dominant display in Sunday's main event, leading home Ferrari driver Charles Leclerc and Red Bull teammate Sergio Perez. Despite an action-packed encounter at the Red Bull Ring that saw several drivers penalised over track limits and strategies differ, Verstappen won a few drivers to stay out during an early virtual safety car period. The Red Bull driver could not be stopped en route to his 5th win on the bounce and 7th of the season. Leclerc briefly led the way after taking advantage of the VSC, but he fell back behind Verstappen as the pair worked through their opposing tyre plans and the Red Bull showed its raw pace, underlined by a late and successful bid for the fastest lap bonus point. Perez delivered a fine recovery from 15th on the grid to end a difficult run and take his first podium since the Miami Grand Prix 4 races ago, overhauling Carlos Sainz in the closing stages and making the most of the Ferrari driver's time penalty for track limits. However, a post-race review by the stewards would later see Sainz handed a 10-second penalty for track limit violations, promoting Lando Norris to P4, capping off the Britain and McLaren's encouraging weekend with their batch of upgrades. Sainz was far from the only driver to find themselves penalised following a post-race protest lodged by Aston Martin. However, Logan Sargent, Nick De Vries and Yuki Tsunoda would all receive additional 5-second penalties, while De Vries again, plus Lewis Hamilton, Alex Albon and Pierre Gasly were all handed 10-second penalties post-race. Esteban Ocon, meanwhile, was retrospectively handed a pair of 5 and 10-second penalties. That left the order behind Norris in P4 as Fernando Alonso in 5th, with Sainz 6th, followed by the Mercedes pair of George Russell and Lewis Hamilton in 7th and 8th. Lance Stroll was promoted a place from the provisional classification to claim 9th, ahead of Gasly in 10th and Albon in 11th. The penalties promoted Zhou Guanyu to 12th, who was 14th at the flag, ahead of Sargent, Ocon and Valtteri Bottas in 15th. Oscar Piastri, De Vries, Kevin Magnussen and Yuki Tsunoda rounded out the order. Haas's strong start to the event ended with the disappointment of a retirement for Nico Hulkenberg, whose loss of power forced him to park at the side of the track, triggering a virtual safety car. So as it happened then, after a frenetic standalone day of sprint action, drivers and teams reconvened at the Red Bull Ring for the main event, the Austrian Grand Prix, with Verstappen starting on pole from Ferrari pair Leclerc and Sainz, Norris's updating McLaren and Hamilton's Mercedes. Ahead of the race start, a minute's silence was held for Dutch racing driver Delano van 't Hoff, who tragically lost his life in a crash at Spa-Francorchamps on Saturday, while there was also a moment to remember the influence of late Red Bull co-founder Dietrich Mateschitz, sorry for the pronunciation there, who passed away late last year. A couple of pre-race communications saw Magnussen and De Vries move from the back row of the grid to the pit lane due to competent changes under parc fermé conditions, meaning 8 drivers, the majority going for medium tyres with only Alonso, Bottas and Magnussen on hards, assumed their respective slots. When the lights went out in dry but cloudy conditions, pole sitter Verstappen made a clean getaway to defend from Leclerc into turn 1 before placing his Red Bull perfectly to defend follow-up attacks from the Ferrari through turn 3 and turn 4. Leclerc slotted into second after his series of looks at Verstappen, with teammate Sainz watching on in third, Hamilton getting the jump on Norris for P4, followed by Alonso, Hülkenberg, Stroll, Gasly and Albon, who held the final points-paying positions. Further back, Tsunoda tagged Ocon at turn 1 and lost part of his front wing, with Bottas also involved before losing grip under braking for turn 4, locking up and sliding off the track, the safety car subsequently being deployed. Tsunoda and Magnussen, both swapping tyres to tick the box of 2 compound U's, pitted under the safety car, which peeled back into the pits at the end of lap 3, with Verstappen mastering the restart to keep his lead over Leclerc and moving more than a second clear in a handful of corners. By lap 8 of the scheduled 71, Verstappen's lead was up to the 2-second mark, while Leclerc began to come under pressure from teammate Sainz, and Norris complained over the radio about Hamilton seemingly exceeding track limits on multiple occasions. "I think you can see I don't need to let you know," said Sainz over the radio as he drew ever closer to Leclerc, the Ferrari dropping further and further away from race leader Verstappen as the corners and laps ticked by. "We stick with the plan, no attack for now," came the response. In the midfield, Perez and Russell both out of position after their qualifying woes went wheel to wheel as they worked their way towards the points, the Mexican eventually finding a way past the Briton at turn 4 after an exciting scrap, while Gasly also made a move on Hülkenberg at turn 3 for 8th. After further complaints from Norris, Hamilton was given a black and white flag, meaning any more track limits violations would put the 7-time world champion on the brink of a penalty. "I can't keep it on the track, the car won't turn," he said when informed on the situation by the Mercedes pit wall. While Hamilton was struggling to keep his car on the track, Hülkenberg parked his smoking Haas at the side of it amid a loss of power, triggering a virtual safety car and sparking a flurry of pit lane activity from cars up and down the order. Hamilton, Norris, Gasly, Albon, Russell, Ocon, Piastri and Sargent all took the opportunity to pit under the caution, saving them some valuable seconds in the pit lane. A lap later, Leclerc, Sainz, Alonso and Stroll pitted, but Verstappen stayed out at the front. When the VSC ended and green flag conditions returned, Verstappen led Leclerc by just under 18 seconds, with Perez also yet to stop holding third from Hamilton, Norris and Sainz, who lost out after Ferrari's double stack, questioning why his opening stint was not extended. Sainz's fight back started with a pass on Norris at turn 3 for 5th, while Hamilton was given a 5-second penalty by the stewards over track limits, something he would either have to serve at another pit stop or at the end of the race. A pit lane incident between Ocon and Sargent, who almost banged wheels, was also noted. More laps brought more gained positions for Sainz, who cleared Hamilton and Perez in quick succession before setting about making an impression on the top 2 of Leclerc and Verstappen. The question being whether Red Bull could make a 1-stop rather than 2-stop strategy work. Intriguingly, Leclerc cut Verstappen's advantage to 15 seconds by lap 23, with his lap times around a second quicker than the leader, who reported over the radio that tyre degradation was high, casting some doubt over the aforementioned potential 1-stop. Hamilton and Perez were the next drivers to do battle in fourth and fifth, the Mercedes almost finding a way past on several occasions, arguing over the radio that the Red Bull was exceeding track limits, something Tsunoda also fell victim to with a 5-second penalty of his own. On lap 25, Verstappen finally came into the pit, swapping onto the hard tyre as opposed to the Ferrari driver's second set of mediums, rejoining behind both Leclerc and Sainz, ending his run of 249 consecutive laps led. Perez boxed a lap later but took on more mediums. Verstappen wasted no time in closing in on Sainz and passing him for P2 at turn 3, with Leclerc some 6 seconds up the road as the differing strategies played out, while another change to the order came when Norris overhauled Hamilton for P4 at turn 3. While Norris made progress, Piastri got caught out in the midfield, scrapping, damaging his front wing in a bottleneck at turn 3, and pitting for a replacement, sending him to the very back of the field ahead of only the sidelined Hulkenberg. There was further drama when Sainz became the latest driver to be given a 5-second time penalty due to track limits, replays showing him going too far over the white lines at the exit of the high-speed penultimate corner. We must be inside track limits on every lap. There's so much going on here, was the message to Norris, given the number of time penalties being dished out and the potential for the points-paying positions to be jumbled up. With Sainz's race dented, teammate Leclerc had his hands full up front, doing all he could to keep the closing Verstappen just 2.5 seconds back on lap 32 at bay. What do you think about 3 stops? Ferrari asked him over the radio, which he brushed aside with a firm no. As the lap counter hit 34 out of 71, Verstappen got within DRS range and came close to passing Leclerc into turn 3 and 4. 1 lap later, the reigning double world champion got the job done with a DRS-assisted pass between turns 1 and 3. Towards the back of the pack, De Vries and Magnussen repeated their Canadian Grand Prix battle with some wheel-to-wheel action from turns 4 to 6, leading to the Haas dramatically running through the gravel. De Vries just completely pushed me off again, Magnussen shouted over the radio, adding a swear word for good measure. Further stewards' activity saw Tsunoda investigated for potentially serving his time penalty incorrectly, only to be cleared by the panel, but Albon was hit with a 5-second penalty for the running theme of exceeding track limits, with De Vries also docked 5 seconds for forcing Magnussen off track. After 38 action-packed laps and with the various strategies in play, Verstappen led the way from Leclerc by some 5 seconds, ahead of Sainz, Norris, Hamilton and Alonso, with Perez, Gasly, Russell and Albon holding the final top 10. Another flurry of pit lane activity saw Norris, Russell, Albon and Hamilton all pit again temporarily, promoting Gasly to the top 6, only for the Frenchman to become yet another driver to be given a 5-second penalty at over track limits. After his stop, Norris made light work of reclaiming the spot from Gasly. Sainz pitted from 3rd on lap 46, serving his 5-second penalties per rival drivers, and rejoined just behind Norris, yielding a thrilling battle between the former teammates as they ran side by side from the exit of turn 3 to turn 6, where the Ferrari nosed ahead. A couple of laps later, Leclerc came in and mirrored Sainz by bolting on a set of hard tyres, with attention turning to what Verstappen and Perez, now running 1 and 2 for Red Bull, would do with their respective strategies. The first answer came when Verstappen pitted on lap 50, moving back to mediums. Despite that stop, he remained in the lead and ahead of teammate Perez, who made his final stop a lap later, taking on a set of hard tyres. Perez rejoined the action in 5th, almost half a minute down on Verstappen, but with the prospect of catching Norris, Sainz and Leclerc, the second-place man, around 13 seconds up the road and making his way onto the podium. Amid ongoing track limits complaints and struggles with the car, which now sat 7th, between Alonso and Mercedes teammate Russell, team boss Toto Wolff stepped in with a clear message to the driver: "The car is bad, we know. Please drive it." A lock-up for Norris at turn 3 was all Perez needed to tuck in behind the McLaren and haul his Red Bull past with DRS on the run to turn 4, before latching onto the back of Sainz's Ferrari the next time around and almost repeating the trick. After some electrifying action and several attempted passes, Perez eventually found a way past Sainz in lap 61, the latter radioing that he had been intimidated a lot in the exchange. However, the time Perez had lost meant Leclerc was 13 seconds clear and seemingly safe from being reeled in. Having recently pitted, Stroll made good use of his fresher tyres to pass Albon at turn 4 for the final point, with Williams' fortunes continuing to work out for the worst when news came in of a 5-second penalty for Sargent over track limits, Magnussen getting the same soon afterwards. Up front, Verstappen pushed for a late pit stop to fit fresh tyres and go for the fastest lap. After some resistance from the Red Bull pit wall, his wish was granted, and he duly pumped in the best lap of the day as he took the checkered flag. Leclerc crossed the line some 5 seconds back, a margin that would have been around half a minute had it not been for Verstappen's stop, with Perez 12 seconds further back in the final podium spot, followed by Sainz and Norris. Alonso could not add to his and Aston Martin's haul of podiums in 6th, while Mercedes had to settle for 7th and 8th, with Hamilton and Russell respectively. Gasly and Stroll rounded out the points-paying positions. After Albon's impressive run to 7th in Canada and the missed opportunity of more points in the Austria sprint, Williams left the 9th race weekend of the season empty-handed, Albon taking 11th ahead of Alpine's Ocon and teammate Sargent. Alfa Romeo failed to add to their points finishes in the last 2 races as Zhou and Bottas took 14th and 16th, surrounding De Vries in the finishing order after the AlphaTauri rookies running with Magnussen. Piastri could do no more than 17th after his visit to the pits for a new front wing with Tsunoda via his lap 1 dramas and a second track limits penalty, and Magnussen the final drivers to finish, leaving Hülkenberg as the only retirement. However, following a protest lodged by Aston Martin, the stewards would spend Sunday night digging into over 1,200 instances where a car was reportedly as potentially leaving the track. The results later updated to promote Norris and Alonso ahead of the penalised Sainz, with a slew of changes further down the order as other drivers were punished for track limit violations. Verstappen said after the race, "I think the most important thing for me was lap 1 to stay in front. After that, we could do our own race. Of course, we opted not to box during the virtual safety car and just follow our normal strategy. I think that worked out really well. The tyre degradation was not that high around here and our stints were perfect, so a great day. I enjoyed it a lot." The next stop on the 2023 F1 calendar will be Silverstone in the UK for the British Grand Prix this weekend, which takes place between the 7th and 9th of July. So that is it for this video then, everyone. Thank you all so much for watching. Please like, share and subscribe to the channel if you are new around here. Dugout Daily the Football channel, hit the Apex F1 channel, and at MTFC Hibs on Twitter. Everybody, thank you all so much for watching, and we'll speak to you all soon. Take care and goodbye for now.